Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Windhorse Publications podcast. My name is Dhammamegha and I'm the publishing director at Windhorse Publications. So this is our 6th episode of the podcast, and we started it kind of experimentally, and it's turned out to be a really great success. We've had hundreds of new listeners, and thank you for all of you who've made contact with me or us to say what you've enjoyed about the podcast or what you've liked about the podcast. And we've now invested in a better microphone, so hopefully the quality will be better from here on out. And I hope you enjoy the conversation that we're about to start. It's with Prajnaketu, who's writing a book, or has written a book that we're about to publish in early November this year. And we were interested in this book because so much of our lives these days are lived digitally. They're lived online. And we wanted to really engage with a Buddhist perspective on how we can become more aware, how we can find depth, how we can lead fulfilling lives online and deal with the nature of the medium and what the medium does to our minds. So I hope you really enjoy it. Hello, Prajnaketu.
Hi, Dhammamegha. Hello.
So I'm speaking to Prajnaketu today, who is a new author for us. In fact, you have just been working on your first book. Tell us the title of the book. What's the book?
So the title of the book is Cyberloka, a Buddhist Guide to Digital Life.
What is a Cyberloka?
Yeah. So it's a made-up word. It's a word I've made up. It's made up of 2 bits. So cyber, which I think you're probably familiar with, it kind of means digital technology, anything related to computers, the internet, etc. But then I've put that next to the word loka. So loka is actually related to the word location in English, but it's a Sanskrit word, and it means something like a realm, particularly a realm of experience. So the concept of Cyberloka is the realm of experience which has arisen out of, our minds meeting digital technology.
Mm. You're currently, while we're talking about lokas, more grounded ones, where are you today?
I am in my study in Oxford. Yeah, so I live with my partner Ellie in a flat quite close to a very pretty stream in the middle of Oxford.
Mm. So what made you write a book about the meeting of the mind and the cyber world?
It's a big question, really. I think largely it's come out of just the history of my life. It's a kind of memoir in a certain way, because I'm a millennial, or what we call a millennial. I was born in 1985. And that makes me old enough to remember a time before the internet, or even before digital technology. But it also makes me young enough that I'm reasonably fluent in it. I certainly don't speak the language of digital technology with as thick an accent as a lot of older people. I think I've just been reflecting on how my generation has sort of straddled this threshold of moving from a pre-internet age through to the times we live in now. And I think I've grown a lot in relation to understanding how those technologies affect our minds, how they affect my life. I sort of think probably those reflections are helpful for other people to hear as well. So that's why it turned from a series of pieces just on my hard disk into something which, it's now a book, Cyberloka.
Mm. Mm. So your own life has developed in parallel to the digital revolution. Maybe that's an archaic term nowadays too. But obviously the thing that you're bringing to it is the Dharma, or a Buddhist practice. And it's very striking in reading the book how sort of strong and central obviously Buddhism is to your understanding of this place. Maybe separate from the book, you could just tell us a little bit about your kind of meeting with the connection of the Dharma.
So I started meditating when I was about 16, actually, so quite young, and I learnt it out of a book. So this is really old school, straight out of a book. And yeah, I just really fell in love with meditation and started, getting very much into it. I had a daily practice now since then. And at the time I was, my spiritual context was in the Church of England, which was, very benign in lots of ways. I'm very grateful I had that upbringing, but it gave me no particular steer or inspiration in terms of my meditation life. So I was definitely sort of I was seeking to approach people who knew more about meditation than I did. And at the time, those people were Buddhists. And so it's like, suddenly, it's not just meditation. Buddhism isn't just about meditation experiences. It's this whole way of life and this whole way of kind of making sense of my life, which, it just made more and more sense, basically, as time went on.
Well, one of the things I was interested in when I started reading the manuscript that you sent is you're a really good writer. You're a great storyteller. And I know that you've been a teacher for some of the times. You're very good at sort of mixing story and concept together. So maybe for the listener who obviously won't have encountered this book by the time this podcast comes out, it's only being released in November. There are sort of three main sections of the book, and they go from like Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 in a way. And so the first one is what you call hyperavailability. So I wonder if you'd like to actually just read a little introduction to that section and give people a bit of a sense of what's in this book.
Sure. In Oxford, the city where I live, there's a bookshop called Blackwell's. On entering, it looks like a fairly ordinary independent bookshop. Keep going and you realise that the small front room extends deeper into the building. Go down the stairs and the shop opens up into a veritable cavern filled with books of all kinds. I vividly recall visiting Blackwell's at around the age of 4, the seemingly ever-expanding rooms of books conjuring up fantasies of an erudite Bond villain's underground lair. On returning to the shop again as a student in my late teens, what struck me instead was attention born of the aspiring scholar in me. On the one hand was the availability of so much information, knowledge, and maybe even wisdom. On the other was the certainty that I would never be able to read it all, not even close. And more new books would arrive every day than I'd be able to read in a year. What dawned on me was that, in the face of this quantity of literature, I would need to choose what to read, to discern what was and what wasn't worth reading. And, actually, I didn't know where to start.
And those are just books, right?
Exactly, that was just books. Yeah, so I mean, it just... when you're talking about physical books, it's like you can only put so many of those in a room, even a very big room like Blackwell's Bookshop in Oxford, which I highly recommend visiting if you've got a lot of money and you're interested in books. But yeah, with the internet, it's almost impossible to quantify how much is available. And even if we were to put a number on it, that number isn't even meaningful. You're talking about like petabytes or whatever the sort of version is above Peter. It's mad.
So you're writing this book, or you have been writing this book with people in mind. What are you trying to help people with? What are you trying to do in writing this book, other than a memoir of your own life of it?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is I think I've learned a lot through reflecting on these areas, and in a way, the memoir aspect is just to kind of signpost how we might, as readers, as kind of human beings faced with this technology, how we might interact with it and better use it. So it's like I suppose the purpose of the book is to try to shine a light on an area which we ordinarily take for granted, even though, relatively speaking, it's sort of snuck up on us. But yeah, we kind of take it for granted. It's something that we kind of do in the privacy of our own screens. But yeah, we can do that well, or we can do that badly. And the book is attempting to help us reflect in a way which will basically open it up for us, make it more pleasant at the very least, and even a support to a meaningful life.
It seems to concern you a lot that we don't live superficially and unawares and a sort of underlived life.
Yeah, well, I think probably that's what drew me to Buddhism, is this recognition that even that there are layers to life, and that we can go. And I use this metaphor in the book, that we can go kind of more deeply down into reality and into the sort of structure of what human life is about. And that with that comes pleasure as well. It's not just a sort of intellectual pursuit, but like it opens up a whole kind of realm of experience which transcends the ordinary. And I just think, that's what I want. That's what I want my life to be about. And if there are ways that we can help each other to access that, fantastic.
So how do we access that in the context of hyperavailability?
Well, so I go through this in the book in terms of looking at what I call the 3 C's of this of operating in this realm. So it's kind of looking at the context in which we are encountering these teachings, information, entertainment, whatever. Sort of setting up the context so that we're receptive to it. And then there's looking at content. So, like, what specifically are we placing our minds upon? Given that we can choose so much, how do we choose what is actually going to result in us growing or leading a more meaningful life? And then there's the 3rd C is consideration, which is a bit of a fudge in a certain way, to use that term, but it's about how we reflect on it. So that we're not just going from one medium to another medium, or from one video to another, or whatever, but we're taking time to allow what it is to make its impression on us. So again, that metaphor of depth is there. The making of an impression is sort of deepening, or allowing something to deepen into who we are. So it actually changes the fabric of our lives.
Can you maybe give an example or a piece of advice or something that a kind of conclusion that you come to in that reflection?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I think is trying to consume less, and trying to be quite kind of picky about what I consume. So for example, if I'm going to listen to a piece of music, what I'll do is I'll set myself up. I might even like tidy my room. Sounds a bit weird to do, but I might tidy my room so that the situation around me is more pleasant to be in, to look at. Then I might turn down the lights, get myself a cup of tea, put on the headphones, and then really sometimes I might just close my eyes while I'm listening to the music and really take it in, and then give myself a decent stretch afterwards. Just to, I don't know whether you sometimes get this if you're listening to a new piece of music, where sometimes there's a bit of a break afterwards, and then the themes from the music, or a kind of the hook line sort of comes through, and it sort of reinforces itself. So it's like, I think we can do that with everything, whether it's music, whether it's if you find something good on Netflix that you like and you want to give attention to, it's that kind of thing. The sort of commentary we might read on current affairs as well, all of that sort of stuff. And I think what I find as I'm doing that is I actually have less time to be giving to my media intake. My data diet sort of shrinks somewhat, but I get more out of it, which again, it sort of parallels that metaphor of a diet, that you kind of want nourishing, wholesome stuff in the right kind of quantities, not a deluge of rubbish. I think it's as I do that, and I'm not the best person at this at all. I've still got some way to go myself, but as I do that, I do find that I kind of go, oh yeah, actually, I don't really want to be spending my time on that now. Or if I'm reading news, I'll be reading more of a kind of considered piece on it rather than a quick update thing.
So sort of a quality over quantity, and then taking enough time to actually digest and process and take it in.
Yeah, that's my aspiration anyway. that's what I try to do. And I think one of the major sort of reflections coming out of this whole process of looking at my life in relation to digital technology is actually the odds are stacked against us. The odds are stacked against me anyway. And that there is this pull to consume more and more. So it does take some initiative and kind of coming back and reapplication of my intention in order to do that. But yeah, I think that's where we're at, isn't it?
And so many things that we fear losing out on, don't we? Sort of not knowing or not getting the latest, or not being able to be in conversations with the right people about things they're listening to or watching, or
I know.
FOMO, isn't it?
I think that's the downside, isn't it? The downside of that is that you end up becoming more proficient in fewer things, ultimately. But I don't know. I guess that's a challenge for us all, is to decide where that balance is to be struck.
So I want to pass on to the second part of your book, which is about super-stimulation, is the overall title that you're doing. It's this great introduction. So how about you read the first couple of paragraphs of that chapter?
Walking along a dusty track in the heart of the Australian wilderness, you may encounter a pitiful sight. A discarded stubby, a small beer bottle, is attracting a lot of attention from the males of the jewel beetle species. The stubby's appearance, smooth, brown, with regular dimples, is rather like that of the female jewel beetle, only more so. In fact, so absorbed are the male jewel beetles in their romantic overtures that they lose all perspective. Gone is their interest in the female jewel beetles. Some of the males weaken through lack of food and are carried off by platoons of ants. Some remain in direct sunlight into the heat of the day, only to be baked alive. Observations of the male jewel beetle's odd behaviour earned Darrell Gwynn and David Rents an Ig Nobel Prize in 2011. Sad though it is to say, I feel a certain affinity with those male jewel beetles.
So the chapter is called Sex in the Cyberloka, and basically it's a whole section of the whole middle section of the book is about dealing with pornography and the use of pornography. And as far as I am aware, it's the first explicitly Buddhist book I've ever read that really tackles the issue of pornography. And, it's also a personal story for you, isn't it? It's also about your own history of using pornography and the effects that's had. So maybe you could just say something about that and kind of what particular approach you're taking in writing about it.
I think the main thing to say to begin with is just that I went through a period in my early 20s where I really struggled with porn. Yeah, so it's my third year at university, and I was watching porn quite compulsively. And yeah, it was a pretty grim time. I found it, well, the way I describe it is I found it dulled even deadened my senses because of the nature of this kind of super stimulation. Because that's one of the things that that's sort of one way in, is to think of it in terms of super stimulation, a bit like fast food in a way. It sort of taps into basic evolutionary or biological, let's say, kind of circuitry, and feeds that circuitry more and more of what it wants. And that was basically where I ended up with porn, was just overstimulated by something which I found arousing, and I found sort of fascinating in a certain way. But then it sort of took on a life of its own, which then cast quite a shadow over the rest of what I was doing, most notably trying to finish my degree.
It's quite a thing to, I mean, obviously, pornography and sex more generally is so often considered a sort of private act out of the public eye, and also hard to speak about, hard to write about.
Yeah, I mean that was my main experience. So the story was I had this period while I was a student, and then I was actually quite lucky because I moved back into university accommodation, and the guy who ran the university network was so strict. It wasn't going to be possible for me to get away with watching internet porn anymore. So that more or less just sort of cut it off completely. And then I went for a period of about, more than 10 years, more than a decade of not using it at all, and making quite a sort of principled, ethical stand of not watching pornography. And but then I sort of after that decade or so, I started encountering other people who were talking about it, particularly other young men, and realizing that there was a sort of contempt actually I had towards them, and that was pointing in the direction of I hadn't quite worked this out, or I hadn't quite fully dealt with this. I thought sort of abstinence was enough, but actually on a deeper level I hadn't really addressed it. So that's what prompted me to write about it. To think, okay, well now I've had these 10 years, actually really good 10 years of lots of meditation, going on retreats, learning more about Buddhism. What can I bring to bear from this new wisdom I have onto the experience I had then? And that was where it came from.
I mean, obviously, there's so many ways to talk about or analyze porn, what goes on in porn, its production, its ethics, all of that. And you draw on, in all of these chapters, actually, you're sort of taking the Dharma and choosing some sections that you think are a fruitful lens or a way of looking at this. And in this one, you look at the 6 realms, which I found interesting because it's very much not a black and white analysis. I mean, you do come out to say that in most instances you think that most porn is sort of probably mostly harmful, and yet loads of people are using it, and it's a big feature of our lives. So how can we address that? And you use this 6 realms. Maybe some people haven't encountered the 6 realms, or certainly haven't encountered it like this. So how do you use that?
I mean, without going into all of the details of the realms, the teaching that they give is of different ways of relating to pleasure, or possible sources of pleasure. And I'm not saying they're necessarily exhaustive in the different approaches they take, but so for example, one way of relating to pleasure is to think, I've got to own something, or I've got to possess something in order to enjoy it. And sometimes actually the possession of something gets in the way of us trying to enjoy it. Or another way of relating to pleasure might be of like clinging to it with almost a kind of like a neurotic zeal, like we want the pleasure to do for us what actually only kind of deeper emotional satisfaction can do for us. And so the wheel of life, or the 6 realms in the wheel of life, point in a more symbolic or colourful way to these different attitudes that we can take in relation to pleasure. And what I say is, I think it's possible to approach porn from all of them. Some of them are more functional or more dysfunctional than others. I mean, I think the main thing really is that the analysis I'm bringing is looking from the perspective of somebody who's using it, somebody who's watching it, and how they might bring greater clarity to what's going on for them while they're watching it, or in the run up to, or afterwards, or whatever. Yeah.
And what do you think people can be aware of?
Well, I think the thing about that framework of the six realms is that it gives people like an easy pointer. So I don't know. Suppose you're thinking you're going to watch porn. Well, like, can you just do a quick, like, where am I on this wheel of life here? Just placing your finger on, okay, where's this coming from? Am I just bored here? Or am I looking for a kind of a bit of energy or a bit of stimulation? Or I don't know. There are other
Am I
options as well.
lonely?
Am I lonely? Yeah, tired. Yeah, all those kind of things. So it's like, I think with a lot of these things, it's bringing even just a little bit more awareness incrementally in over time, and that will build to a position where we're encountering that desire or that interest earlier, and then before it's becoming more of a seemingly insurmountable thing.
One of the things in your book is that, and maybe this goes back to the idea of the Cyberloka itself, is and certainly a kind of classic Buddhist analysis, isn't it? There's a subjective and an objective dimension to all experience, and often with analyses of media, the emphasis is so much on the objective dimension. So, say with hyperstimulation, it might be about, I don't know, the companies that are running these kind of data availability or algorithms or things like this, and then not much attention is given to the subjective dimension. And in all of the sections of the book, you do something that's in a way prioritizing the subjective dimension, in the sense of become more aware, understand your own motivation, know where your freedom lies, what's the gap in your relationship to these kinds of technology or images, for example. But you certainly don't bypass a look at how the objective factors are attempting to, directly relate to the mind, your mind, through their technologies, through the ways it works. And I did find the section on pornography that you're doing very interesting. You're saying, well, there's better and worse porn. How do we know that? And some of it is on what effect will it have on you, but also some of it's around the ethics of the industry, for example. And there's better and worse pleasure. So I wonder if you can remember off the top of your head how you end the that section on pornography, where you talk about the sort of two ethics, if you like.
Yeah. Well, what it boils down to is, first of all, there are better kinds of porn, and I think that's become a really important point when it comes to talking about pornography more generally. So I sometimes compare porn with fast food. So there's almost like a spectrum of fast food, and see whether this works for you, Dhammamegha. But like at one end of the spectrum, you've got, your kind of vegan, organic, locally sourced deli. Yeah. And then at the other end, you've got the kind of out of town industrial estate kebab van. Right. And pornography pretty much sort of spans a similar sort of spectrum. What I call the mainstream industrial variety, which I find pretty repulsive, if I'm completely honest. It falls around kind of Kebab Kid, Burger King kind of territory on the spectrum. But that's not to say that there aren't pornographers who critique that, and who are seeking to use pornography as a positive educational device. And I think that's something that can often get lost in the conversations around porn. So that's the first thing, is that there are better kinds of porn. But then the second point is there are better kinds of sex than porn. At least that's my contention. In a way, it's leave it to the reader to like an exercise to the reader, I suppose. But yeah, I at least in my own experience, solo sex, masturbation, partner sex is just better, basically, when I'm not using porn, not watching porn. And then thirdly, there's better kinds of pleasure than sex, which I think probably is the most controversial statement in the whole book. I think we glorify sex in at least in British culture, and so that the expectation of it far exceeds the reality. And what the Buddha says is, look, there's loads better pleasure out there. It's more subtle, but it's longer lasting. It's more deeply pleasurable, and it's the pleasure that comes from freeing one's mind. So yeah, that's how I broach the I would say the scope of what I'm talking about in that chapter. Yeah.
Who are you hoping this chapter will help, really?
I've probably got two different people in mind. So the first lot of people would be people like myself. People who have I was thinking particularly younger men who have a spiritual bent, and they want to somehow bring their pornography use into a Buddhist context. So it's not something that they feel like they have to partition off. I think that was one of the things that was most difficult for me, was that I had a kind of spiritual self that wasn't willing to acknowledge, my more biological self. So I think, there's something about bringing an awareness to, and a kind of a support to other guys who might have been in a similar position to me, or perhaps use porn more casually, but are looking to kind of go beyond that as well. But then I think there's a wider audience as well, which is the kind of Buddhist who I sort of imagine as being a bit older and not really knowing very much about pornography, and perhaps even not wanting to talk about it or feeling uncomfortable talking about it. And so those basically fleshing out the terrain, so to speak, for those older Buddhists, or those older people, I suppose, who perhaps don't have an idea of what pornography is. So that when they do find themselves in conversations with people who are talking about pornography, they've just got more knowledge to draw on. You don't have to watch loads of porn in order to get a sense of it. And I hope that chapter gives enough so that reflective people can get a sense. All right, this is the terrain. This is what's going on here.
So you're writing specifically about pornography, but in a way, super-stimulation comes in loads of different forms, doesn't it? We can be very addictive, whether in terms of gaming, anywhere where you've got something that is a strong intensifier done digitally, usually done on your own, that can become compulsive and that is responding to some mix of both pleasure and trying to ameliorate some kind of dukkha or seek connection or something. So although the chapter itself is about pornography, the analysis is really much wider than that.
Oh yeah. It's really the central question is how do we distinguish between stimulation and pleasure? And the issue for you or for other people might not be pornography, but it might be the sort of bright, colourful, attractive things that you get on your smartphone, or it might be internet dating, or it might be there's dating apps, or there might be so many things where we're going to something for a sort of hedonic hit. And I think that analysis, if you can sort of step back from the question of porn and apply the analysis of the six realms, and then what I say about the ethics of restraint and ethics of altruism, I think it applies. Yeah, it just requires a bit of creativity from the point of view of the reader there.
So people might be thinking that this is an incredibly long book, a big book, but it's not actually. You're just quite pithy. So, but not only do you deal with those two sections on hyperavailability and superstimulation, but you also move on to, let's say, the outbreath of the Cyberloka. In other words, publishing one's own content through social media and other platforms. And you've written this fantastic apocryphal sutta. So I wonder if you'd be willing to read the first part of the Facebook sutta.
Yeah. Okay. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Blessed One was staying in the Kosalan country, along with a Twitter following of 500 million. Upon emerging from meditation, the Blessed One dressed himself in his robes and wandered among the Wi-Fi hotspots for his daily newsfeed. On his way back, while checking the Bhikkhu Sangha Facebook group and reading an exchange between two monks from Kosambi, a post occurred to him never posted before. This is Cyberdukkha. This is the origin of Cyberdukkha. This is the cessation of Cyberdukkha. This is the path leading to the cessation of Cyberdukkha.
I mean, it's so funny, isn't it? It's so great and so funny and so appropriately modelled on suttas to make sense. Of course, you made it up.
Yes, I did. Just to be clear, yeah.
Just to be clear. But you also use this the model of the Four Noble Truths or the Four Ennobling Truths. You know, this is the origin of Cyberdukkha, and this is the cessation of Cyberdukkha, and this is the path leading to the cessation of Cyberdukkha. And there's so much in this. You talk about, say, right motivation, right restraint, right medium, right cognition, how to deal around a right critique. So actually you lay out the sort of eightfold. I don't actually know if it is it eightfold?
It's eightfold. Oh yeah, of course it's got to be eightfold. Yeah.
Eightfold. Yeah, I hadn't counted it, but of course it is. So you lay out the eightfold path with it. And it's far too much for us to go into in detail in the interview now, but it really does give a very cogent analysis, again, of that interaction between the subjective and the objective dimension of the encounter of social media and conversations on social media. Maybe instead of going into the content of it, what was your concern in writing this? In addition to humour?
So it sprang out of watching, reading what Buddhist friends of mine were posting online. And I'm not talking about things like kittens, skateboarding, videos, those kind of things, which are relatively benign. But it was particularly around a time when there was quite a lot of discussion within the Triratna Buddhist order that we're part of, we're members of. And quite a lot of heated discussion, actually, I think it's fair to say. And what I felt I could see happening was that people were reading other people's views and then critiquing those views on the basis of, quite a superficial reading of them. And the people whose views were being critiqued took umbrage and then critiqued again. And so it got progressively more and more heated and quite acrimonious, I might even say. And I was sort of sitting on the sidelines watching this and thinking, it really doesn't have to be like this. I was finding it really painful, actually, to see. And part of me wanted to kind of wade in and go, look, guys, don't do it like this. But I felt actually probably rightly that were I to have done that, that would have been just received as more criticism and not moved anything forward. So I suppose one of the things I was conscious of during that period was that being a Buddhist is no inoculation against disharmony online, particularly through text-based media. And it got me thinking, well, okay, then how do we do this in a way which it's possible for us to engage in robust exchange with one another, but to do it harmoniously? I think disagreement is inevitable, but it's possible to disagree in ways which show an imagination of the people towards the people we're disagreeing with. And what I try to show in that chapter is how we build up to a point where it's possible for us to critique one another harmoniously.
It's quite an aspiration, isn't it? Given as you say, the nature of the medium. and what does and doesn't get communicated in that medium. So actually, one of the things you end up saying is something about fidelity, isn't it? Not fidelity in the porn chapter, but fidelity in the social media chapter. What do you mean by fidelity in this case?
Well, I'm sort of drawing from the work of there's this whole kind of idea in evolutionary anthropology of the social brain hypothesis. And so the scholars in that area have done research. It's quite old research now into the way that different media are received by people. So they even set up effectively a kind of hierarchy of from lower to higher fidelity. So, and what I mean by fidelity there is like how faithfully the medium communicates what the person wants to say. And so, when it's video, real time, or even face to face is the highest fidelity medium, but certainly video, real time, audio, where you can pick up the tone of voice, the expression of the person. It's sort of broadens the imagination compared to 160 characters. I mean, we all kind of know that, but and the other thing is, it's possible to communicate something in 160 characters. You've just got to use that medium really skillfully.
I think for now we're probably just going to leave it there as a bit of an invitation to engage with these questions. I mean, one of the things I'm hoping as the publisher of this book is that people obviously will find it useful. But the book has a series of reflections, examples. Some of them are your examples, and people's experience might be quite different. But there are modes of engaging in reflection about the effect, about the pratitya samutpada, if you like, the conditioned co-production that arises in this loka, in this field, between the mental states that we bring to them and the nature of the technologies that we're engaging with. So sort of my hope is that this is a useful book, whether you agree or don't agree or find your conclusions correct, to be reflecting on our own lives in this realm, which of course are ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We're swimming in this at the moment and paying attention to that seriously. I wonder if there's anything that you want to say to people who might have their curiosity piqued and might be interested in the book. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Really, I just want to just echo what you said there, Dhammamegha, about the book not actually stating conclusions on any of this. And in a way, how could I? We're talking about something which is changing so rapidly. But what I'd really love is for there to be a community of people who are taking these reflections seriously, who are kind of looking at how they're bringing their motivations to what they're writing, how they're interacting with their sources of pleasure, how they're kind of getting wisdom from whatever it is they're interacting with. I think those are like vital questions for us to be grappling with. And well, my offering really is to participate in that conversation and to inspire others to participate in it as well.
There's one place where you say sometimes getting a handle on all of this could make the difference between living a good life and scrolling yourself into old age, sickness, and death without noticing. I might be paraphrasing slightly.
Slightly, but it's that kind of thing. Because we're going to be spending so long if digital technology continues in the way it is, so much of our lives is going to be mediated by it. If we don't get a handle on it, how much of our life is going to be lost in a way through that.
Well, thank you, Prajnaketu. Congratulations on the book. Very exciting. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about it and from you from November onwards when it gets launched. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dhammamegha.
Windhorse Publications is part of the Triratna Buddhist community. And this podcast is sponsored by Future Dharma Fund, a Buddhist fundraising charity which helps fund Dharma projects across the world, including ours. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider donating to them to help them fund current and future projects like ours. You can find out more about Windhorse Publications by going to our website.